Hi, Dave Jones here again. We're going to look at a lesson on power chords today. Power chords are used mainly in sort of rock and blues type music, mainly rock, but you use them in blues as well. And they're usually used with some sort of distortion or overdriven effect. But I mean, you don't have to practice them at all. And they give a sort of a more aggressive sound than nice, pretty sort of open chords. They're sort of, and you can use some damping techniques, which I'll go into in the lesson. But I've got a PDF up on this on the website, so you could print this off. It tells you just about everything you need to know. But it's done with lots of little pretty colours, which I don't know if you can see, and it's got like a root note box down the bottom that tells you where to find each of the power chords. So hopefully after this you'll be able to, if you're getting tabs or you've got a book or something with power chords in, you'll be able to play any power chord. So there are 12, any of the 12 power chords, if you like, from any of the root notes in at least 2 fingerboard positions. So basically speaking, power chords can be played off of the E string root note, or the A string, and off the D string actually, slightly less common perhaps, but we're going to concentrate on the E and the A strings for this particular lesson. Okay, and when you see power chords written in books or on tabs, sometimes they have the number 5 written after them, like sort of, G5, E5, etc., etc. And what that does, that's referring to the letter name is referring to what the chord is called. Like if it's an A chord, the root note, or the root note is A, and the 5 is the 5th note of the scale. So if you major or minor scale, the 5th note is the same in either. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the root note and the 5th note. I'm playing the A at the 5th fret on the thick E string with my 1st finger, and I'm playing the A string at the 7th fret with my 3rd finger. If you've got really small hands, you might want to try your little finger to start with, but I would strongly suggest that eventually you use your 3rd finger. And you hit those 2 strings, and that is an A power chord. The reason it's an A power chord is because I'm holding an A note down with this finger. If I move it around, if I moved it to the 3rd fret, it will be a G power chord or a G5. And that's the same, whatever fret I stop at, keeping that relationship between the fingers the same. The 1st finger on the E string, that's the name of the chord, the root note. The 3rd finger on the A string, always a 1 fret gap apart. And as you move around the guitar, it becomes a different power chord at each fret. And if you're using the PDF, the box at the bottom shows you the notes on the E string from frets 0 to 12, and on the A string from frets 0 to 12, because you can also get power chords off of the A string. So for example, the 3rd fret of the A string is a C note. If I put my 1st finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, I put my 3rd finger on the 5th fret, again the gap stays the same on the A, D, and like I say, even on the A, E, and even the D strings, but we won't be doing D at the minute. And I hit those 2 strings, and because that's a C note, I've got a C power chord, the C and its 5th, or a C5 chord. So what happens is, as you move the chords around the neck of the guitar, it becomes a different chord depending on what fret you stop at. What I would suggest, because it's a bit of a nightmare if you're a beginner to this, is trying to learn all the frets at the same time. What I would suggest you do is learn, especially if you're using an electric guitar, or even if you're using an acoustic. A lot of acoustics have got dots. They're called marker dots at various frets. Usually, most commonly at 3, 5, 7, 9. So if you learn the notes at 3, 5, certainly at 7, because there's no sharps and flats there. You've got G, 3, A, 5, B, 7. That's on the E string. And on the A string you've got C, 3, D, 5, E at the 7th. And then if you're going to do the other dot, you've got C sharp on the E and F sharp on the G, because there's no sharp between E and F and B and C. I'm doing some theory stuff, but people remember burger and chips every Friday to remember there's no sharp between B and C and E and F. So other things to show you about power chords. Yeah, right, okay. So when you're playing the power chord, for argument's sake, I'm going to play a G power chord with my 1st finger on the 3rd fret of the thick E string and my 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the A string. If you can, from my experience, beginners find this very difficult to start with, but you might be coming from it from another style of guitar, for example. If you can, leave your 1st finger draped but not barred, definitely not barred, draped across the other strings, lightly touching them, and it causes a muting effect. It means they don't ring. 2 reasons for this. One is if you're really rocking out and you're not particularly accurate with what you're hitting the 2 strings here, they're not going to ring. But even if you're really, really accurate, if you're playing with heavy distortion, what can happen is if you're playing them like this and these strings are unmuted, if you like, what can happen is you get a thing called sympathetic vibration, and eventually these strings will start ringing very slightly, and with distortion it will sound absolutely horrendous. So this finger, first finger, just practice touching it lightly across every other string. You don't have to worry too much about the A string because you're covering that with your third finger, but it should be touching the D, G, B and E strings very lightly. And you should be able to, with a bit of practice, you should be able to play all 6 strings, but only get those 2 ringing. And you can do the same thing when you move to the A string. What you do there, if you can, is use your first finger. I'll give you a close-up there. Tip of your first finger touching lightly on the underside of the E string, which gives it a dead muting effect. And again, this finger touching the remaining strings. So I'm hitting all 6 strings then, but I'm only getting the 2 ringing. And what you've got to do really with the power chords is just practice learning the names, obviously is very important, but also moving them around the neck in different places, because if, for example, you're playing a power chord up here, although the relationship between the fingers remains the same when you move to here, the gap obviously widens. As you can see, the frets get narrower and wider depending on where you go on the guitar. So it's very important to get your fingers used to moving them around. Now there's a few songs up on the site using power chords. Probably the best, easiest one is one called Brain Stew by Blink-182, and then there's some others that get progressively more difficult. But start off with an easy one. Try and remember the names of the chords you're playing, as well as what frets to stop at. Very, very useful. If you're getting tabs off the internet, you're getting a book, you're going to be able to play these in other places. If you're looking at the PDF, the other thing I should mention is I've put down there's a mysterious green dot. I've got the black dots on the PDF, on the E and the A strings are showing the root note. And like I say, if you look at the box at the bottom, that will tell you what root note you're playing. So, for example, if you're looking at the PDF, the note at the 2nd fret of the E string is F sharp or G flat. They're the same note. Don't worry about it too much at the moment. I'll go into that in other lessons if you don't already know. But they're the same note. You can call it either. It depends what key you're in as to what chord you call it. So that's your root note, F sharp. If you play the power chord there, you will have an F sharp or a G flat power chord. If you moved it back to the 1st fret, your root note's F, you would have an F power chord. Now, the green dot. What happens is I've got the, like I say, the root note shown in black, and the 5th, which is creating the power chord, shown in red. I've also got a green dot there with my 4th finger in brackets. Now the reason for that is it's not definite, but many of the sort of 70s, early 80s rock bands only tended to play 2-string power chords. It's a much tighter sound in my personal opinion, and I always play 2-string power chords if I'm going to play a power chord. A lot of the more grungy bands like the Nirvanas and the Green Days, possibly the Blink-182s, often play 3-string power chord. What that is, if we go back to the G again at the 3rd fret on the E string, 3rd finger, like just as before, on the 5th fret of the A string, and little finger on the, if you can just see there, little finger on the 5th fret of the G string. So I've got a 3-string power chord now. As you can hear, it adds a somewhat sort of grungy, sort of heavier sound to it. But it's still only a power chord. It's still got only 2 notes. It's got the root, the 5th, and the octave of the root. So that note there is a G as well as that. And that note is your D. So you've still only got 3 notes in there. But you've got just a slightly more heavier sound. And whether you use a 3-string power chord or a 2-string power chord, the same thing happens on the A string, but you put it on the string below, is entirely a matter of your own personal choice and preference. If you're a beginner, you'll probably find the 2-string power chord easier to start with. If you're more into grunge, then you're probably going to want a 3-string power chord. If you're more into kind of tighter sort of rock and that sort of stuff, then you'll probably want a 2-string power chord. But make it your own choice. Let your ears be the guide. So I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you again sometime.